The Code 3. A live podcast sponsored by the Marin Fire History Group. All about the history of the fire service in Marin County, California. And now your host, retired Fire Chief Bill Lellis.
Good day and welcome to the Marin County Fire Chief's historical website. Today we'll be introducing you to the Chief of the Marin County Fire Department, and he will be explaining the whereabouts and how it came to being this 1935 International Fire Truck. We call it a squad. So it was built and assembled in San Anselmo for a grand total of about $1,500, not including taxes. So I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time. So with that said and done, I will introduce you to the Fire Chief of the Marin County Fire Department.
Good day, and thank you for having me with this important project you guys are working on, the history of the Marin Fire Service. Bill and team approached us about a little discussion regarding the truck you see behind me that was donated to the Marin History Museum and the Marin County Fire Department from the Jordan Smith family. It has a long, deep history here in the county. My name is Jason Weber. I'm the County Fire Chief, and I look forward to telling the story. So the truck was put in service in 1935. It was authorized by the Tamalpais Forest Fire District Board in December of 1934. As you mentioned, for the purchase of the International chassis for $1,042, and subsequently the buildup on the back done at a blacksmith in San Anselmo for $410, with a grand whopping total of just about $1,500. You know, the truck went into service to serve the Tamalpais Forest Fire District in 1935. In 1942, the Tamalpais Forest Fire District, which was the first organized wildland fire agency in the state of California, transitioned into a county department. There's a lot that happened between fire districts and such with an act, the War Act, I believe it was, in that 1942 time frame. So the Marin County Fire Department was born. With that, the equipment from the Tamalpais Forest Fire District moved over. It served the Marin County Fire Department until its subsequent retirement date we're still looking at. Ultimately, it was purchased by the Smith family, who owned and ran the Nevada dumps. And the truck was at the dumps and served the dumps up there for some time. Jordan Smith was quite the collector, both in antique motor vehicles as well as horse-drawn carts. Subsequently, unfortunately, he passed away. His family and kids were connected to us through Roger Smith, his nephew, and an interest in bringing the truck back to the fire department and ultimately to the public, where it's displayed in car shows and other items. So several years ago, the Smith family donated this to the Marin History Museum in partnership with the Marin County Fire Department. We hold the vehicle in trust for them, bring it to car shows, get it out on display, and we're happy to do that. So it had a 200-gallon tank and a front-mounted pump. The front-mounted pump is missing, and I think, as you mentioned, it probably ended up on a range somewhere or another vehicle, but it is missing. And I think, you know, this was one of the first trucks in the Tamalpais Forest Fire District fleet that was uniquely built as a fire truck, not a pickup truck that had some accessories on it. And I think subsequently in 1937, several more were purchased, but this is one of the first.
Wow. I see it has a booster reel, and so it's 200 feet.
Yeah, probably 150, 200 feet. Would agree. And I think that was predominantly probably the choice, firefighter's choice on the vehicle. As I learned in my younger career from people like George Thornton, if you can avoid leg hose, you're better off. So the booster reel certainly was an advantage.
Well, I assume the crew was how many people?
Was a fire warden, and then that fire warden would pick up summer helpers. People like Bill Bagley, who is a retired state senator, assembly member, remembers as a high school student, he would sit on the bench here in Woodacre, and if there was a fire, the warden would drive by and pick up summer helpers, just extra hands to have on the truck to go fight the fire. So a little less organized than we are today, but it certainly worked.
For its time, though, it's a good system.
Absolutely.
I would imagine it had no communication system.
Yeah, no, not in the 30s. And, you know, as we went on, mobile radios were somewhat more prevalent on the mobile equipment, but really didn't get into, you know, handy-talkies or portable communications until much later, probably the 70s. As we mentioned, you know, these trucks were sparsely equipped, I would say, with some of the most rudimentary and basic firefighting tools available. As you look in the cab, you know, there's really room for two, and you know, my suspicion was that any extras were riding on the tailboard back then, which would have been a great way to go to a fire for sure, especially at night, in a warm night. Vehicle is a manual, as you'd expect, and relatively simple. If you get in here and take a look at it, you know, you've got white paint that kind of marks the lights, the backup light, the choke, the electrical for the pump, those kind of things. I think, as mentioned, you know, this being a 6-volt system, one of the rare and few 6-volt cam sirens that were produced in the metropolitan town of Ross. The chassis is a commercial chassis, so an international chassis with a custom build-up on the back. I think one of the unique features, when we had the truck, there was discussion about us doing essentially a frame-up rebuild. And looking at the truck, you know, I think so much of the character has to do with the dings, dents, and I'm sure midnight body work that occurred over time. And I think some of that history is so important. And you can look almost everywhere on this truck. You can see where some body work was done. You know, where a grinding wheel has smoothed things out. And I think that tells part of the story here. And the decision was to leave it in its current state rather than trying to bring it back to something perfect.
I noticed there's a brush hook on it. Is a brush hook part of the department's equipment these days? It
was. It certainly isn't today. So as I mentioned, you know, hose, rake, a brush hook, you know, were some of the equipment that you find on here. And strategically placed across the watershed used to be cabinets filled with hand tools for firefighting. And so what wasn't on the truck would have been picked up in one of those tool compartments that was cached throughout the watershed here in the county.
Yeah, those brush hooks end up being more hazardous than they
yeah, I think so, yeah. We can't afford that in the workers' comp business today.
And it was painful. Okay. With this movement, let's go to the back, Chief. We'll talk about, looks like, what, 3/4 inch hose there?
Yeah, 3/4 inch booster reel that I suspect was low pressure compared to some of the beam guns that you'd see on like the old 1560 that we have.
I assume that the hose compartments we're looking at now were original.
Yeah, I think they were.
2.5 inch hose, maybe 1.5 inch hose.
Probably 1.5 inch. I don't know if the water supply back then would have supported the 2.5.
Yeah.
So I suspect that, you know, 1.5 inch cotton jacket hose was on this rig. But again, going back to
Yeah.
I'm sure the booster reel was the tool of choice.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, they were a nightmare. I assume the pump that was installed in the front had drafting. Had a positive displacement pump and you could draft.
Yeah, and you could pull up to a water source, nose in, draft. I would suspect the same.
Yeah.
And these nozzles, I don't think are The originals were on this truck, looking at the bores on them.
Yeah.
You'd go through 200 gallons in about a lickety split. So they look good, and maybe this one on the end might have been around, but even then I suspect the gallonage per minute was a little too high for some of those. So, and I suspect they would go find a water source, reel in the booster line, go find the water source, draft, fill up, and go back. And what I think you would have seen in this original state was back pumps, and fighting fire with lines of convenience. So a road, a trail, certainly the Marin watershed, when timber was being harvested, had a lot of roads for that. And I suspect that they would take the fire to lines of convenience because of the equipment and the staffing.
I can recall the first wildland fire that I ever participated in as I was a student and living in Tiburon, and the hill below the convalescent hospital. I was asked to help out. It was just in citizens help out, and my tool was a wet burlap bag.
Yeah.
That was quite common in the
Yeah.
late 50s, 60s. So I would imagine this Supervisor Bagley must have been on the end of a burlap bag many times.
Yeah, for sure. We were talking a little bit about the pump that's missing, and looking back at the original minutes from the Tamalpais Forest Fire District and the warrants that were issued during those meetings. One of the warrants was for the purchase of a Barton F3 pump that would have been mounted on the front of the truck and driven from the motor itself. And Bill and I were talking, and we suspect that, with limited water on any of these trucks and the ability of these chassis, commercial chassis, to carry any more than probably 200 gallons without being completely overloaded, we suspect that they would have gone to a water source, drafted to refill the truck, or had some kind of tank system on a cistern up on the mountain that they could refill from, gravity feed, is probably how they got the water they needed for fire suppression. Yeah. Doesn't get much more simple than that, right?
Yeah, 6-cylinder inline.
Is it a 6-cylinder line? Which is a pretty big motor back then.
And it also had a crank, and you got space for a crank.
Yeah, and I think the crank space was taken up by the pump. I think that's how they drove the pump, was that piece.
Like a
It would
PTO.
have required a starter to get the truck on, because that space would have been occupied by the pump. Fire truck, that is.
Well, I can see where this could get overheated.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think being based out of Woodacre here, the importance of the tunnel, the Bothene tunnel that ran between here and Fairfax, because you can imagine how slow this thing was at climbing any hill. And, by the time you get up over White's Hill and back down, you'd be overheated on the motor side, your brakes would be smoked by the end of the trip, and that was just the beginning. So I think that tunnel played a pretty critical role in the speed of getting trucks to different parts of the county.
I'm assuming that this could roll and pump at the same time. You think?
I would suspect it in a low gear.
A low gear, you could stand. A driver could run on a vegetation fire and kind of get the.
Yeah, it doesn't have. You see some of these trucks that had sweeps underneath them.
Yeah.
For kind of that rolling grassy meadow area.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't have any sweeps that I can see, but I would suspect with the pump being run off of the front of the motor, that it had the ability to pressurize as it was going.
Yeah, they took advantage of all the uniqueness in the new engines.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. Number one, it says.
Number one.
And you believe this is probably one, if not the first one?
Certainly, we think this is, if not the first, fire truck as we define it, with a mounted tank. A pump
manufactured for that purpose.
I think that other chassis, mostly pickups, were used in some manner and could carry backpack pumps and some fire personnel back then.
I wouldn't want to have to change a tire.
No. I was looking at that. Yeah,
Yeah, I would assume that those are pretty expensive today. The
Yeah,
tires.
for sure. And you look at it, and that whole, I mean, it wouldn't be like changing a modern tire for sure.
But to the family that donated it to the Marin Historical Society, it took great care of it. Really great pride.
Yeah, and I think, Jordan Smith, as I mentioned, was so dedicated to all of that antique, both motorized and non-motorized equipment. I think he had a full-time mechanic that on the ranch that would support this vehicle and others, and we got it in running condition, and it maintains, our mechanic will maintain it. And it's finicky, as you'd expect.
Yeah.
The carburetor has been replaced and rebuilt, as you can see. And if not replaced, certainly rebuilt.
But for 1935, $1,500, not counting the price for the cam siren probably was included. Maybe the firemen out here put the cam on.
Could have, yeah.
So it's totally 100% Marin County.
100%, born and raised, right? Except for the International Chassis, which at that time probably came out of Detroit, or I would suspect. That's what Vector is, and it's got the ability to go down into a vacuum. So we talked a little bit about the drafting piece.
Yeah, that's true.
And, that was probably pretty cool for its time.
Yeah. One of the most coolest places of it is the engine at St. Kentville.
Yeah.
The grab bar on the right-hand side is also a discharge.
No kidding.
It's one I've never seen it before.
Yeah.
It's the only one I've ever seen, and they really took advantage of every inch on the apparatus and stuff like that.
Well, I think certainly when this truck was added to the fleet, most firefighters had skill sets of a mechanic,
Yes.
a body shop person, a welder, and as I mentioned before, you look at this and the bangs and bumps and the body work done on it was all done by the people that drove it, and they took great pride in the vehicle, and I think it was as much a challenge after you went out and dinged it up to get it back in service with some fresh paint before the fire chief showed up the next morning.
We would like to take this moment to thank Chief Jason Weber and his staff of the Marin County Fire Department for their assistance in bringing to you the history of this 1935 International fire truck. It is said to be the first motorized piece of apparatus for the Marin County Fire Department. We thank you, Jason.